Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with another episode of Ask Dave. And this came from a commentator who recently discovered the YouTube channel, and he asked me to give a brief overview, at least I don't know if you say brief, but it's going to be a brief overview of late 20th century composers for somebody who doesn't really know where to start. You know, list 10 of them. The top, I can't say the top 10, just 10 really good ones. And that's what I've done. I've picked the ones who popped into my head most immediately because there are many, many more than 10. And I know you will supplement this list with many, many more than 10. But what I've done here, and this is in no particular order, is I've made the list of 10 major composers who flourished in the second half of the 20th century. A couple are flourishing still, but that's where they got going or got ending. But, you know, from 1950 to 2000 plus, you know, the greater 20th century. And they are wonderful composers. And I've selected 3 iconic works of each. And the list is published down below this video so that you can see who they are and what the pieces are. And then you can go and experiment and listen and see what you think and see what you like and don't like. The only real, aside from what spontaneously occurred to me, the only criteria that I used in coming up with this list is I wanted it to be representative of the range of musical expression during this period, which was just wonderful. I mean, there was music in all kinds of forms and styles, and I think I've got a lot of them here. Not all of them, but a lot of them. A representative sample, at least as representative as I could make it, with only 10 slots to fill, because I was determined not to do 16 or 20. It was going to be 10 this time, just 10. So here they are. Number 1, John Adams. Remember him? I just talked about this, his collected works on Nonsuch. At least it's all readily available. 40 fun-filled CDs. John Adams is an amazing composer because he began life in minimalism and then has since evolved his own far richer and more complicated and varied style in a whole range of pieces, in operas and chamber works and orchestral pieces. He's really at his best in orchestral music or music for instrumental ensembles of various sizes. And so the 3 works I chose were Shaker Loops, his first sort of minimalist masterpiece, and then Harmonienlehre, his most popular large orchestral work. It's really a big 3-movement symphony, quite beautiful and consistently ear-catching and interesting. And then finally, Grand Pianola music, which I love. That's my sort of favorite Adams piece because it has humor. It has humor. Some people thought it was just trash when it was written because it was funny and it was irreverent. And I think like I said, there is nothing more important in the world of music in any of the arts than the ability to project humor. And Adams has it. And that is a rare gift, perhaps the rarest of them all. So John Adams is number 1. Number 2, Henri Dutilleux, the French composer. Now, Dutilleux is fascinating. He lived to be like 99, I think he was when he passed away. A lovely man. I met him at the Cannes Classical Awards. Just one of the nicest people you'll ever meet in your entire life. And he wrote very few works, very highly polished works. He worked very, very slowly. His style is atonal in the sense that it doesn't use normal melodies or normal keys. He prefers, either modal structures or sort of pitch centered, but otherwise non-tonal types of construction. But it's so captivating. It's orally captivating. It titillates the ear. The music is lovely. And again, I have selected works that I think show his creative range and his artistic evolution. The first piece is his first symphony, which is an absolutely beautiful work that begins with a passacaglia that is so cool. The opening tune goes da-da, da-da, dum-dum, bum-bum-bum, bum, da-da, like that. I mean, that's not exactly right, but how many other people are going to attempt to hum the Passacaglia theme from Dutilleux's First Symphony? I mean, I'm doing my best here, so give me a little leeway. Anyway, it's a great work, and it shows his earlier style. It's a little bit more tonally centered, and it's quite symphonic and meaty, and it really should be played lots of times. It's great. And then the Métaboles, his most popular, to the extent that it exists, orchestral work. It's a Cleveland Orchestra commission, and like the title, Métaboles, suggests metabolism. It's a piece in which it's a set of progressive variations. That is, the initial idea is systematically deformed until it becomes the subject of the new idea. This also has a little Passacaglia in it, by the way, as one of its series of variations, until at the very end, it all comes together in a giant flamboyant display of orchestral virtuosity with a return to the opening idea, and that he manages to do this in an almost entirely non-tonal context, but really writes a piece that you can follow, and it's really interesting to follow, is, I think, extraordinary. It was commissioned by the Cleveland Orchestra and originally performed by George Szell, who did a wonderful job of it. And there's a recording that exists with them, but it's been recorded quite a few times, and it's just fantastic. And then his violin concerto, L'Arbre des Songes, The Tree of Dreams. That was composed for Isaac Stern. It's a beautiful 20th century violin concerto. If you like, for example, the Berg Concerto or any of those sort of more modern but still very approachable and expressive works for violin and orchestra, you are going to love L'Arbre des Songes. I love it, and you will too. So Dutilleux is number 2. Number 3, Witold Lutoslawski, the Polish master. Great, great composer. Another composer who started off really almost as a neoclassicist, a Stravinsky neoclassicist, and then evolved his own non-tonal but extremely listenable and approachable language, one that makes it very clear what the music is doing. And I've selected works that show that. His first symphony is from his neoclassical period. It's a little spikier than neoclassical Stravinsky, but still very much of that school. The Third Symphony is one of the great 20th century masterpieces, and I also chose his cello concerto for a similar reason, because both of them have a similar program. Now, Lutoslawski achieves it very differently, but it's wonderful to compare the two, because the program is the gradual emergence of expressive melody from various types of opening that serves to block that emergence. And so there's struggle in the music, and there's a wonderful feeling of progressive intensity, and then a glorious conclusion at the end. Now, this is expressed in the full orchestra in the Third Symphony, and in the cello concerto, it's expressed with a solo string instrument, which is in a way much more difficult because a string instrument is a melody instrument by nature, and it wants to have a melody. And the cello concerto begins, I remember how vividly, it's almost like the word I like to use is autistic. It's struggling to become expressive, and it gradually succeeds. It's a beautiful, beautiful, and very affecting work. I saw Rostropovich perform it, and it was really a tremendous experience. So I really think Lutoslawski is one of those composers whose music is challenging, but very rewarding. And so he's worth listening to. Next, after Lutoslawski, Steve Reich. Now, Steve Reich was a minimalist who, unlike John Adams, did not entirely break with his minimalist origins. He created his own style out of the elements of minimalism, which that is simple harmonies, consistent pulse rhythms, and a lot of his music has text, and some of it is really iconic. They're just iconic second half of the 20th century works. The most iconic of them is Music for 18 Musicians, the first one that I selected. Then there's the Desert Music, which contains some text, and it's a big orchestral work. It's quite lovely. And then finally, Different Trains, which shows how the language of minimalism can be used to express really stunningly harrowing and topical musical ideas or political ideas, because the different trains in question are, American trains with, African-American workers on them, and trains to Auschwitz with, people bound for the gas chambers on them. They're different trains. And Reich has put this all together using electronics and instruments and voices with tape loops. It's an extraordinary piece, an extraordinarily moving piece. Really first class. Reich is a great creative force in contemporary music, and he's still around. But these were pieces that he started off with, I think it was in the 70s or somewhere around then, 70s and 80s, and he's still going like gangbusters. So after Reich, George Crumb, someone who I knew him fairly well and spoke to him on several occasions and interviewed him once, and we did a celebration of his music in Cannes in France. And just such a nice guy. And he's another composer who evolved a completely personal style out of everything. Most of his music a lot of his music is vocal. He was very fond of Lorca's poetry because of its hallucinatory and spiritual qualities. And so some of his pieces are settings of Lorca poetry. Others use extended instrumental techniques, including electronic amplification and playing on the inside of the piano and using just tons and tons of percussion. And it's so much fun. So the three works I chose by Crumb, who's 1, 2, 3, 4, this is number 5 in our list of 10, are Ancient Voices of Children, which is one of the great song cycles of the 20th century. Black Angels for Electric String Quartet, which begins with the Night of the Electric Insects. Oh, don't you want to hear what that sounds like? And it does. Amazing piece of music, a very dark piece of music with quotations from Schubert. And he often likes to quote Mahler. That's in Ancient Voices of Children, the Kindertotenlieder, and works like that. And then finally, Music for a Summer Evening for 2 amplified pianos and massive doses of percussion. It's the same outfit that Bartók used in his sonata for 2 pianos and percussion. And it's part of a series called Macrocosmos, which is a play on Bartók's Microcosmos. So there you go. Crumb's music is very referential to contemporary music, to ancient modes of music, to all kinds of things, while still being a completely original concoction, all of its own. It's just tremendous. So George Crumb, I think, is a wonderful composer to get into. And after George, we go to Olivier Messiaen, who really got going in the 1940s, basically, in the late 30s and 40s, but who, made it quite a bit further on and wrote a tremendous body of work. Most of it was influenced by 3 things, which he would have told you. Hindu rhythms. Lots of rhythm. He regarded himself as a musician and a rhythmicien. He was a rhythmicer, a rhythmicizer, or something like that. So there's that. And then there's bird song, because he was really into birds. You hear fweep, fweep, cheep, cheep everywhere. And his Catholic faith, which was extremely deep and extremely important in his expressions. And so the 3 works that I chose are his first, which is his most iconic work, the Turangalila-symphonie, which is an orchestral behemoth for huge orchestra and piano solo and glockenspiel solo and vibraphone solo and, best of all, an Onde Martineau solo, that electronic instrument that goes like that. Oh, it's just amazing. So there's the Turangalila-symphonie in 10 movements, lasting about an hour and 20 minutes. The Vingt regards sur l'enfant Jésus, which was written around the same time, 20 glances at the baby Jesus, which is a piano cycle. And then the late orchestral cycle, Des Canyons aux Étoiles, from the canyons to the stars, which was created after Messiaen toured the American West, Bryce Canyon and the Grand Canyon, and saw the magnificent geographical formations and the birds that inhabited them, and the desert and the wind. It uses a wind machine and a jar of sand that you shake around, and it's a wonderful piece. Absolutely beautiful. And it sort of sums up a lot of what his music was all about. So those 3 works by Messiaen, these are long, sweet type things. He did pieces that were based essentially on the organ symphonies. He was an organist. He wrote a huge body of very important organ music. And these symphonic cycles and orchestral cycles and piano cycles were similar to the organ symphonies of, for example, Widor and Vingt, which were not really symphonies in the traditional sense, more like extended suites with multiple numbers of movements. And that's sort of the tradition that Messiaen is coming from. It's great stuff. After Messiaen, here's something totally the opposite. George Lloyd, who I have been talking about quite a bit. George Lloyd was a British composer. I had the great honor of playing in and arranging the American premiere of his Fifth Symphony at the same time that he was conducting the world premiere. I think it was in Brighton. It was recorded quite some time before, actually. It's a lovely work. Lloyd was a traditionalist, a conservative. He was interested mostly in Italian opera because that was his father's big ambition. He was severely wounded in the Second World War. He was only able to resume composing after nearly dying in a ship torpedo attack. He was nursed back to health by his wife, who was Swiss, at her home in Switzerland, and thereafter he was able to resume composing with his Fourth Symphony. I've selected some late symphonies of his that you should hear, numbers 5, 8, and 11, which show us that however referential and traditional he is, and he's a gifted melodist, a wonderful orchestrator. He does all the things that you want to hear in a big, beautiful, colorful, romantic symphony. But the music is recognizably contemporary. It is unquestionably that of someone with a strong individual personality. And the wonderful thing about it is that, there's only good music and bad music. And sometimes I think the difference between the two is that a good composer knows what his strengths and weaknesses are and works within them to show them off to best advantage. And Lloyd knew. He knew the kind of music he could write well, and that's exactly what he did. And these are all recordings on the Albany label, and a few are on Lyrita, conducted by the composer, if you want, or Edward Downes and some others otherwise. But it's first-rate music, absolutely first-rate music. And after Lloyd, Einojuhani Rautavaara, who I also talk about quite a bit on this channel, the great Finnish composer who passed away just a few years ago. Rautavaara was a wonderful, wonderful guy who I just talked about because I did a list of composers who turned their back on serial composition, and he began life as an atonal 12-tone guy, or he adopted it. He didn't begin that way, but he adopted it early on and then gave it up later. And his music is extraordinarily moving. Often it has a strong spiritual impulse, as does the music of many of these composers, Messiaen, of course, and George Crumb, and then some others. But Rautavaara, I have here Symphonies number 3, which it's an amazing work. It sounds like it could have been by Bruckner, but it's not. And it's actually a 12-tone piece. But you'd never know it to listen to it because it's also so followable. Really a beautiful, noble piece of music, extraordinarily. Then the 7th, which is Angel of Light. He wrote an Angels series. And his idea of angels was not, cute little things with, feathers and a halo. It was fearsome and the messengers of God. I mean, beings not to be trifled with. But the Angel of Light is one of the more benign of his angel pieces, and it's extremely lovely. It's his 7th symphony. And then his 3rd piano concerto. He wrote 3, and the 3rd was composed for Vladimir Ashkenazy, who has recorded it. It was designed to be conducted from the piano. It's really a beautiful piece and a very, very effective piece. A lovely, lovely modern 20th century concerto. And there aren't many. I mean, there really aren't when you think about it, and the second half of the 20th century, there aren't that many great piano concertos being written or composers who write them regularly. So I think that Rautavaara's 3rd is a very, very important work, and it's a masterpiece. So after that, we're up to number 9, right? I think we are. I think we're doing really well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now that was 8 and 9. Right, 9. Of course. Lou Harrison. Now, I chose Lou Harrison because Lou Harrison is the iconic composer who represents the fusion of the Western tradition and the Eastern tradition. Harrison was a remarkable character, really was. He was interested in early or primitive tuning systems. He's principally a melodist. He was interested in monody, that is single line melody with simple rhythmic accompaniment. He was an innovator in the use of percussion instruments, and his music is all over the place. It's impossible to categorize, but his East meets West pieces, these fusion pieces, are really extraordinary, incredibly lovable, and like nothing else out there. So first I chose the Concerto in Slendro, which is for violin, and well, it's hard to describe. And it's 2 tack pianos. That's piano with thumbtacks in their hammers. So it sounds kind of twangy, almost like a harpsichord, but not really quite. Like a honky-tonk barroom piano, and a celesta, and then a whole slew of percussion instruments that he created himself from, what he called the American gamelan, from pieces of junk, from brake drums and hubcaps and stuff that he found. And the result is extremely Indonesian sounding. Really a fabulous and fascinating work. And after that, I chose his piano concerto, which he wrote for Keith Jarrett. A wonderful and entertaining and tremendously vibrant piece of music that integrates his Eastern influences and his medieval influences into a more standard, traditional concerto structure, although it has its severely non-traditional elements. And then finally his ballet Solstice, which I just think is one of the most beautiful pieces written in the entire 20th century. It is incredibly gorgeous. It's actually, I think it's a sextet. It's written for a cello, a double bass, an oboe, a trumpet, tack piano, flute, and celesta. There may be an extra string thing in there, maybe a septet or in there, but it's just those few instruments, and they create an absolutely unforgettable world of beauty and serenity and joy. It's glorious. So Lou Harrison and Solstice. Listen to Solstice. Trust me. I made a video about it. There's a sample you can listen to in that video. And finally, and again, these are in no particular order, so I'm not going to say, however, who could be without? No. Any one of these at any time you feel like listening are worth hearing. Malcolm Arnold, who I've also been pushing relentlessly because he just got crapped on by the musical establishment because he wrote lots and lots of film music. He was a bit of a gadfly in the English musical establishment. He's a British composer. He wrote 9 symphonies, the last of which are terribly bleak and disturbed. And he was very bleak and disturbed. He had manic depressive episodes and several suicide attempts. He had a very troubled life. But his music can be hilariously funny and amazingly tuneful. And again, written with a kind of clarity and straightforwardness in its emotional expression that it makes it unmistakable. It's like nobody else. Absolutely nobody else. Some of it may sound like commercial music, like television music or elevator music, but there's so much more to it there because you have to simply accept it as it comes and let it invoke the feelings that his music is expressing. And it works. It works really well. And I've chosen a couple pieces, his Symphonies 4 and 5, which are rather interesting. The fourth uses some Caribbean percussion. And it's just a lovely work that's very, very undervalued. It doesn't get a lot of play in discussions of Malcolm Arnold symphonies, but it's a big one of his major ones, and it's just terrific. But don't get his performance of it. Get the ones on either Naxos or Chandos. Arnold did his own recording of it. It's extraordinarily slow and really one of the least effective of all of his recorded performances. And he did usually very good recordings of his own work, but this was toward the end of his life, and maybe he was on his meds, I don't know, or off his meds, but don't know. Get the other ones. And then there's the Fifth Symphony, which is his symphonic masterpiece in many ways, and the English dances. Of course, any of the dances, there's English dances, Scottish dances, Welsh dances, and Cornish dances. They are the English equivalent of Dvorak's Slavonic dances or the Brahms Hungarian dances, and they are just delightful. They're so much fun, and people are tempted to dismiss them and treat them as unserious because they are light music, avowedly light music, but but they're masterpieces. And a masterpiece is a masterpiece, whether it's heavy or light or whatever. So those are the 10. I hope this answers your question and gives you some place to get started in the second half of the 20th century. Take your pick. You've got 10 composers. You've got 30 works to choose from. It really ought to get you going. And I would really be interested to hear what you think of some of the things you listen to. And everyone else here, I'm sure, will have other suggestions. And I hope that they'll contribute them, and that those who are questing and who have questions will read the comments and also consider those as well. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.